Alright, so it's a beautiful Saturday here in St. Augustine. I'm out here working on Windsong, just doing multiple projects today, this and that. I'm working on door frames on the inside, floors, finishing some cabinet mock-ups, this and that. There's never one steady project to work on, there's always a bunch of them, so it's hard to keep up with explaining what exactly is going on at all times. But for now, I'm just going to give you guys a tour of the bottom of the boat and the hull and update everybody of what's been going on. So without further ado, let's go look at it. If you've been reading this blog for a long time, you'll know that when I got the boat out of the water, I initially started working on the bottom. I knew I was going to have potentially some blister issues, and it wasn't long before I realized I had some serious blister issues. So I initially stripped off all of the gel coat on the bottom down to bare fiberglass to let it dry out. Now the hull's been drying out for about 3.5, almost 4 years now, so I figure it's going to be as dry as it's ever going to be. So I started to come back to the bottom and do some work to get it all faired and finished so I can put the boat back in the water, hopefully by the end of the year. But as with these things, it's impossible to put a date on it, so we'll see. So here's an example of some good sized blisters, and most of them are about this size. You can see my whole hand fits in them. They aren't small. There were some smaller gel coat blisters that one of the owners had fixed up before. You could see them here. They just look like little angle grinder gouges that they filled up with fairing compound, but these were massive fiberglass blisters, and at last count there's about 90 of them throughout the boat. You can see they're just scattered everywhere. I've started to repair them, and last week I came out here and did a quarter of the boat experimentally but successfully patching these up. Put a couple layers of fiberglass on each, and it pretty much just covered up the whole taper with fiberglass, and they're mostly flat with the hull, so I don't think I'll have to do much fairing. That's good news. So I'll probably continue with that technique of just 2 layers of biaxial glass and epoxy to fill in these blisters. So I've got about 3/4 of the blisters left to fill in with the fiberglass, and then I'll sand them, of course, and apply some fairing compound, and then the whole bottom will get a couple coats of clear epoxy just to seal it up, and some fairing compound where needed. You can see here on one of the boat stands what the status of the hull looks like before I ground it down to bare fiberglass. You can see the red was the actual bottom paint that was fairly poor and chipping away. The white was the gel coat with a blue sublayer, and the bottom of that is the fiberglass. So this is what I all had to grind down through, and I just used a cheap Harbor Freight angle grinder with some 36 grit discs, and it did a wonderful job. The bottom is fairly smooth, and I didn't have to pay an ungodly sum for someone to come out here and peel it. It just was a lot of hard work in June of 2010, but I did it, and I think it's going to turn out pretty good. You can see here some of the through hulls. This is the cockpit drain and the saltwater system intake. They had some pretty old style through hulls with just these 2 bolts that went through to the seacock. So I gouge these down and I'll fill them up with some glass and thickener to replace with some more modern style through hulls and seacocks. Another job I still have to do out here, but this is kind of a combination of the hull and the engine room, is the cutlass bearing in that rudder shaft hole there. I'm not sure if that can be seen, but the bearing in there needs to be replaced. So that should be a little bit of a project. You can see down here I had some weird pitting in this fiberglass, and I think it's just a result of the poor layup that they initially did, which caused all these blisters. So I gotta fill this up and do some repair work. This is all me. I've ground it down. It did make a nice shape here before, but I ground that down to expose more of the pitting. The top sides of the hull is in decent shape. It's a little chalky gel coat, but there was no really major issues with it. It's pretty dirty right now, but I think in the end, all it will need is just a cleaning, sanding, and polish and wax. And the gel coat on the top sides will look pretty good. I've written about this green stripe before. It used to be blue, but since then I've kind of installed a bunch of stuff, done a lot of work, and it got dirty and gross, and it'll need another coat of paint or two. You'll see over here these drains. I had moved them from above that green ridge to below it because the water wasn't draining properly from the deck drains through them. It was kind of a parallel line to the deck, so it didn't really have an angle for it to drain, so I moved those down and closed up the holes above them. Here we're looking at the bottom of the keel. This is the front of it coming down to the bottom. See, I haven't done much with it, and there's a lot of scratches and gouges. I've run aground once really hard on a rock, and there's some extra scratches underneath the bottom of it, which I guess I'll just go show you right now. Here's the bottom. It's hard to see, but it does need some work, and I guess I'll need to get the boat raised up to actually get under there and access it, but that's one of the remaining jobs of the bottom, is to patch up the very bottom of the keel and get it all nice and strong once again. Funny story over here. As the boat was exposed to the elements with no windows, and it was wide open for the rain to come in, the water would gather in this deep bilge, and so much junk would get into it I couldn't pump it out without ruining pumps, so I ended up just using a shop vac to suck all the water out. But it would take about 15 different buckets of 5-gallon bilge water to finish the job, and it would take forever. So eventually I just said, screw it, I'm going to drill a hole in the bottom and let it drain out. And that's exactly what that is. It's in the middle of a blister, so it's going to get repaired anyways, so I don't feel too bad about it. And my epoxy and fiberglass skills have developed over time to where I feel like it's not an issue to have a tiny little hole down there right now. I can repair that easy. Here's the other side of the boat. It's pretty much the same story. Blisters that need repairing, and through holes that need installing. You can see the gel coat in a better light over here probably. You'll see over here, these are 2 through holes that I had patched up and repaired. I didn't need them. One was unused in the first place, and the other was the head intake, which I'll no longer need as I'm going to a compost head. And it probably was an unnecessary through hole anyways, even if I did want a flushing head. So I patched those up with plenty of layers of biaxial glass and epoxy and closed it off one by one. I used the bigger ring first method, going to the smaller ring. You'll see written plenty of places to start with a smaller ring and expand to a bigger ring. There's merits to each, but I chose this method and it worked out pretty well. And one major decision I still kind of need to make on the bottom is whether I'm going to raise the water line or not. It sat at its dock for a long time where it got these blisters, and I don't know if it was the way it was tied to the dock or not, but you could see this particular blister was at the water line, and there's some other blistering over here at the water line because the water was above it. So I may raise it a couple inches, but I have a feeling it might be unnecessary just due to the way it was tied up to that dock. So we'll see. It's not the end of the world if I don't do it now and wait for it later, but the issue will be, say this blister right here, making it blend into the hull, and these gel coat blisters over here. I've worked with trying to do some gel coat before when I patched up a hole back here, but you can see it was a pretty terrible job matching the color. But that was a long time ago when I was first learning how to do all this stuff, so maybe I'll give it a shot again and try to actually match the color to the gel coat. But other than that, that's basically it for the hull. You can see I've got the mast sitting here waiting faithfully for me to one day do something with it, which will basically be the last project of the boat before I put it back in the water. I got some plywood under this tarp right here that I'm using to mock up the floors and cabinets. They don't let you keep much on the ground here, so I've got all my scrap wood and everything sitting up here on top of the mast. You can see this is a piece of the old flooring. This is one of the old rotted bulkheads that I replaced. Just pieces of scrap wood. And more scrap wood back here. So I guess that's all for this video. The next one will be up there on the decks, and I'll show everybody what I've been working on up there. But for now, so long, and thanks for watching.